Discussion 3, Genre.Triptych, created and narrated by Carlos Osorno. I decided to do something that I experienced in my life, and since I am a big fan of watching movies, I chose cinema. Cinema has been developed greatly throughout the 20th century till now. The three developmental stages of cinema that I chose were first the black and white stage, which became popular in the 1920s. Then came color, which began in the 1930s through about the 1960s and gained popularity from there on. Then the third stage was 3D imaging, which began in the 1980s through the 1990s and still continues till today. The following three films that I chose to represent each developmental stage of cinema are all favorite films of mine, which have really stuck around, and I've actually seen them, even though it's quite surprising that I'd seen a black and white 1941 film and actually enjoyed it. I had to watch it during high school, but that's why I decided to choose these three forms of art. The film Citizen Kane, which came out in 1941, directed by Orson Welles, is a great representation of a black and white film. Black and white can be traced back to Muybridge in 1870 to 1880 with his experiments on imaging. Later on, Thomas Edison also is credited for being able to create motion picture machines, one of them being a coin-operated arcade machine. Most of the first black and white clips lasted about a minute to 2 minutes long. Nowadays they can range from hours to 2 hours, 3 hours, or short films, which are again 1 or 2 minutes. Thomas Edison's researcher, who is accredited for a lot of the groundbreaking findings, is William Kennel Laurie Dixon. Moving on with the color stage of cinema, I decided to go with the movie Grease, which was released in 1978, directed by Randall Kleiser. This movie is a representation of a musical play. So, color imaging could be traced back to 1666 by the great scientist Isaac Newton. Even though color was being experimented with, and by the time the 1930s hit, there was black and white as well, but color was way too expensive, and only big movies could use color to create their imaging, and a lot of people didn't think it left that same feel as the black and white. Also, 1861, James Clerk Maxwell, he was a prequel to color, and he demoed some of the principles of color imaging. In the 1930s, two groundbreaking movies that brought about color was Robin Hood and Wizard of Oz. From there, color kind of stopped and didn't become big until the 1960s. As I continue with the third and final developmental stage of cinema, I chose to do Avatar, which was released in 2009, directed by James Cameron, and again, it's a 3D cinema. So 3D cinema can be traced back actually to the late 19th century and early 20th century. People began to work with it. The first commercially released film was in 1922, called The Power of Love. Obviously, the technology at that point was not the best, so it was still being developed throughout. Um, we can also see that Lawrence Hammond and William F. Cassidy created the Teleview system in the late 1922, which was a technology that definitely helped 3D, and that's what Power of Love was released in. Um, but then throughout uh, between 1930 up to like 1960, 3D really died out. Revived back in like the 1960s. We can see that some of the main technologies were developed by Arch Gobbler and Stereovision in the 1970s, which brought back 3D. But because the 3D in this time period was not the best, it really died out again, and it didn't become popular again until the 2000s. And it's actually said that 2010 was the big year for 3D cinema. Uh, so then that year, almost every film was released in 3D. But now 3D is a common thing. IMAX is now a big IMAX 3D is now a big thing seen in theaters, which people go out with their families to watch, so they can feel like they're actually inside of the film. Thank you for listening to my presentation on the development of cinema and how it showed to the audience. Um, First went over how it went from black and white imaging to color imaging, and currently now we have the 3D imaging. As you can see, here's my references. And again, thank you. This is Carlos Osorno.